Tonight's story is brought to you by FiendFX. FiendFX is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to helping charities with fundraising by providing them with the most innovative scarehouse and walkthrough events. They have created fully adaptive environments for the sensory sensitive so that everyone can enjoy the experience. For more information on FiendFX and their services, please visit them on the web at www.phoenfx.org. Without further ado, tonight's tale awaits you, right through there.
Welcome, my friends. Come, sit around the fire and let me spin another tale for your amusement. These tales, I tell you, these nightmares found only around the fireside, speak of many things, things which cannot be explained. Stories of the unknown, the unseen, and poorly understood. Some disturbing, yes, some terrifying, certainly. Stories of the darkness which reside in all of humanity, expressed in ways in which nature herself cannot account for, things beyond her ability and even beyond her comprehension, stories buried in time and hidden by shadow. An American in Ireland, fresh and running from the horrors he found on the western coast of the Emerald Isle, stumbles across an old village with a long and dark history. Could he possibly understand that the town's history has returned because of him? In its time, one would have thought of it as beautiful. Stately, yes, strong and masculine. 3 stories of good, solid Irish granite being built in the 1700s for those of great importance. A rich merchant, possibly, or a government leader. Certainly a man of stature and means. It was, and is, an imposing sight to come across in the dark forest of Roscommon County. It stood then, as it stands now, tall and proud. It sits back in the woods, ensuring the inhabitants' privacy. Its stone walls rise from the ground a full 3 stories high. Around the steep slope of the roof, the 3rd floor extends into a solid wall, with holes for drainage every so often located at its base. 2 great chimney stacks rise from the rooftop, creating the appearance of a house far taller. The bottom floor, the tallest of the 3, was preceded by a flight of 10 granite steps ascending to a stone portico, featuring 4 stone pillars of Tuscan stylings, easily 3 times the height of a man. Between the center 2 pillars stood a great oaken door on wrought iron hinges with matching handles. Atop the door, in a far more modern styling than in the door itself, was a half-moon of wooden-framed glass. The glass stands unbroken to this day. As one climbs the stairs, they may notice that beneath the stairs, and only partially exposed to the cool Irish air, is a basement. This basement runs the full width and breadth of the manor house and seems, by all rights, to be holding the entirety of it off the ground and away from the Irish rain. Upon entering the manor house in the forest, one would see a beautiful wooden grand staircase winding its way gracefully to the 2nd story. To each side and to the rear, there are wooden doors built as sturdy as the front door, but not to nearly the scale. To the right, one finds a tastefully decorated drawing room complete with hardwood furniture, long curtains, and portraits of important members of the family. And to the left, an unnamed chamber done up comfortably and in all green. The walls, the curtains, the rug on the floor, the upholstery on the dark wood furniture, all in the same shade of green, and each of these rooms have another door on the opposite side. To the rear of the entrance hall, and through the 3rd and final visible door of the area, is a hallway which feeds into the rest of the house. In its day, the house was a masterpiece of wealth and comfort. Today, As it has been for over 100 years, it sits abandoned. No, that is not quite correct. It sits uninhabited by any living man or woman. 100 years ago, it was touched by something dark. The lady of the house suffered from some unknown illness and passed. Her husband, so distraught at his wife's passing, or so it is said, killed himself to be with her. When the family arrived to settle the estate, all fell ill except for 3, who killed themselves in various manners appropriate to their whims. And so the manor house in the forest of Roscommon was branded as cursed, and then abandoned. By that time, the forest had already begun to reclaim it. Today, and not as it stood then, ivy climbs the walls. Many windows have been shattered by time and tempest. The stone walls and the stone stairs are beginning to crack, and through them Mother Nature sends her shoots, stems, and leaves. But the portico remains clear and in good repair, as does the door, the lower floor, and the basement. But, as the old stories go, something had moved in to occupy the old manor house. The deaths surrounding the manor house and its original owners were just the beginning of the troubles which laid upon the lands of Roscommon. Strange and unexplained deaths began to occur. Many were attributed to disease, while others old age. To some, pints and midnight stumbles. Those, of course, were the official reasons. There were whispers, though. Whispers about the manor house in the forest. Whispers about the Cha Malahe. But even whispers die down. They die down, but never truly die. And in the early 40s, as the Second Great War was gaining steam with many young men from all countries dying on foreign soil, a woman named Maeve heralded in the resurrection of the old fairy tales, and with a new vigor not often seen and never forgotten. Maeve was walking home one night, alone, something only the foolish or the drunk do in the Irish countryside. It was a dark night, with no moon to be seen and no clouds in the sky. It was said that night a murmuration of starlings flew near in a formation not common for them, a crescent shape undulating through the night sky off to the horizon. The eerie fluttering of their collective wings could be heard for miles around, and some swore they could even hear the starlings whisper. When they found Maeve's body the next morning, it had been stripped of flesh. The American sat comfortably in a padded aisle seat as his train rumbled into Roscommon. His mind, though, was still all a-whirl with his time in Waterford. The old man's story, now 7 days old, stayed with him as he traveled to his next stop, as did the memory of the woman. He only caught a glance of her, her pale skin, her long black hair, her bright blue eyes, but that was enough. Had he not heard the story told that he had by the old man, he would have been entranced, seduced, and probably another statistic in the Waterford crime blotter. Those eyes, though, they still called to him when he was quiet, and especially at night. He knew he couldn't stay there, and so he left Waterford in the first taxi he could catch and found himself in Dublin. He knew he couldn't stay there in Waterford, and he knew he could never return to there either. He had found what he was looking for, and far more. It was time to leave, and time to move on to the next leg of his journey. He had heard other tales in the pubs he visited. The Irish, he found, were great ones for telling stories. If you sat in a pub with a pint and some chips, you could hear the most wondrous tales on just about any subject. Mostly, though, it was about domestic issues, who did what to whom, and all of the possible, and yet not so plausible, reasons as to why. But sometimes someone would go off on a tangent, and then a new adventure would start. He wasn't sure why, but he had been drawn to those tales, like those eyes, the luminescent, sparkling, beautiful blue eyes. The tales called to him. He loved them. He loved to hear the elders talk, and they always spoke with such passion and only tempered by nostalgia, even on the littlest of things. and sometimes he would pick up on something that would cause him to take out his phone and Google it. From there, even more wondrous stories would unfold before him. But that's not why he was going to Roscommon. Roscommon was in the opposite direction of Waterford, and so he considered himself safe. The farther away it seemed to the American that he was from the west coast of Ireland, the less he felt her call. The train entered into the station. The American disembarked, found a taxi, and went to a little bed and breakfast he found while researching his vacation. It wasn't lavish, but quaint, with old-world charm. A relatively popular pub occupied the corner of the block the B&B was on, and had, as the reviews online had said, passably good food. The American took time to settle in and then went down the street for a bite to eat. The pub matched the B&B he was staying in. It was clean, quaint, and busy tonight. Most of the tables were full, but there were a few small ones left on the outskirts of the cozy, bordering on claustrophobic, dining hall. One small table next to a large roaring fireplace was empty, and he decided on that one. The fire crackled as he drank his Guinness and ate his shepherd's pie. The light of the fire danced across the heavily ordained walls within the pub. There were pictures of places, and of people, friends, family, and famous folk, and of cars, and of boxing matches. There was the odd, ancient Guinness advertisements framed and hanging as well, but one picture above them all caught his attention. It was an old photograph blown up to a much larger size, giving it a slightly out-of-focus look. It was of a manor house in the woods. It was housed in an old, thin wooden frame with older glass chipped at the edges, and it had no notations or labels indicating a name or reference points or anything about it at all. It just hung there in the middle of a sea of memories on the eastern wall of the pub. The server, a brown-haired and brown-eyed, plain-attired woman in her 40s, noticed him staring at the photo on the wall and came over. There was a friendliness and a joviality in her manner and in her eyes. He had seen this look before. It was a look of a bard gearing up for a great tale of importance, or at least of great amusement, for the teller. She inquired about his meal and if he wanted another pint. The American told her that he was fine for the moment. She then, probingly, mentioned that she had caught him staring at the picture over there of that manor house. He smiled and nodded.
"That picture there, sir."
She started in a smooth Irish brogue dripping with honey.
"And it's the only picture of such a house you'll find in this pub. Is there to remind folks about stumbling home in their cups after a night of crack here at the pub."
It was an obvious lead-in into a story. It was, the American thought to himself, the bardic version of a clickbait. The American took the bait greedily and another sip of his Guinness before inquiring how a simple, unadorned picture could remind anyone about the dangers of walking home drunk. Before she could start, another older gentleman at a table near him looked up to the server and said something in Gaelic to her. The server hushed the patron in English, dismissing him with a schoolgirl giggle and a platitude. The American made a mental note of the approximate pronunciation for later research. She then told the American of the poor maiden Maeve in the 40s, back when that man Hitler was bombing around northern Dublin looking for Rathmines, but never quite finding it. She told him of the way they found poor old Maeve and about the Starlings.
"Sure, if you be believing that Starlings could do such a thing. No, some of the folks around here still believe in the hosts of the unforgiven souls."
That last part she said with an exaggerated dramatic flair for emphasis. She then warned him, with a twinkle in her eye and a smile on her lips.
"So you have a choice tonight. Either have another few pints and then get back before the sun sets and the moon rises, or have another few pints and then a cup of coffee to ensure you're sober enough to not wander off course on your way back home."
The American ordered another pint, and as he waited, he Googled the phrase he thought he had heard the old man say to the server. The phrase was "Tcha Malihe," and it meant cursed house. As the pint was delivered, he inquired about the location of the manor house. She lost some of her perkiness.
If you mean to go poking around the old place, you best do it during the daylight, and it would be a very good idea to not.
There was a specific emphasis on the word not. Her manner had gone a little stern. To not?
Not go inside. To not go at all, maybe. It's an hour walk outside of town by the old Bailey Road. When it forks, go right and look for the piglet on a pedestal, and you're in the right place. But if it don't feel right, come on back here for another pint.
She smiled brightly at the American. The older gentleman scowled at the server, shook his head, and went back to his drink. The server paid him no mind as she passed him on her way back to the bar. The next morning, the American enjoyed a full breakfast of Irish bangers, fried tomatoes and mushrooms, potatoes, and baked beans. He rented a bicycle at a local shop and pedaled his way down the old Bailey Road. It was a long and narrow road once it had left the populated areas. It transitioned from blacktop to cobblestone and then to packed dirt. The bicycle was sturdy enough, and its tires were in good enough repair to handle the road in whatever its condition. The day was not bright with sunlight and a little cold, though the chill did not touch the American as he pedaled on. His route was tree-lined and quite pretty, but as he pedaled, the trees grew thicker and the canopy heavier. Soon, a divide in the road appeared, and he took the path to the right as he was instructed to. Another 10 minutes of pedaling, and he spotted a clearing in the road ahead with what looked like a wide path heading off to the right. As he approached, he saw not a path, but an overgrown road winding into the forest. On the right-hand side stood a short granite Tuscan column, and at the top of that column stood a granite sculpture of a rampant boar. The chill in the air finally hit the American, and it made him shiver. He dismounted and walked the bike past the column and down the road. The air was cold, yes, but eerily still. He couldn't help but to notice that there was no bird song, no motion in the leaves or the trees or the bushes, and none of the typical fauna scampering around. There was nothing but the sound of the leaves under his feet and tires. The pathway was dense with foliage. The path could be followed, but the growth seemed to form walls around the pathway. And soon he came to another divide in the road, right or left. The American, using the infallible logic of one faced with making a decision based on no information to bias him, chose to take the right-hand path because he was right-handed. This path was an elongated 5-minute walk, with the trail steadily losing daylight, which the American found odd because it was still mid-morning, and so he attributed it to the density of the foliage. The path ended in what appeared to be a tunnel leading underground. This was not unusual for a manor house. The servants' tunnel was constructed to allow access by servants and tradesmen without disturbing the owners. It was a private pathway for the domestics, for workers, and for deliveries, so that the functions of the house could continue without interruption. They were also used to ferry in secretive rendezvous out of sight of house guests and of family from time to time, and even as a method for egress in emergencies if other modes were inconvenient. This one, covered in ivy and completely black on its interior, left the American unnerved. It played tricks on his eyes, making him believe he saw shadows moving about inside the tunnel. And even more terrifying to him, he imagined he heard whispering emanating from the tunnel's depths. But the worst of all for the American was the stench of rotten meat which permeated the area. He was sure something had died in that tunnel, and it was possible, to his rational mind, that the movement and sounds he witnessed was just a murder of crows feasting on whatever poor creature had spent its last moments in there. He decided that entering the tunnel was probably not a good idea, and so retreating farther back, he removed his phone from the zippered pocket in his jacket, opened the camera app, and used the zoom function to frame an appropriately eerie photograph of the tunnel opening. He captured the image, replaced his phone in its protective pocket, and made his way back to the fork in the pathway, determined to take the left path and not return to the right. It hung upside down inside the tunnel and watched the strange and foreign soul approach, stop, and stare at the entrance where they resided. The rest became restless and started to make plans, but it stayed quiet and just watched. It stretched its leathery wings, its bony hands with elongated, twisted fingers curled and released. It bent its knees, careful not to release the claws which held it fast to the top of the tunnel. A low, rasping gasp echoed through the chamber as it sucked in air through its toothless mouth. It would be nightfall soon. It inhaled deeply again. The sweet smell of rain was in the air. The American found his way back to the divide, and this time took the left path. It was much like the right, equally as overgrown, but wider and straighter than the right-hand path. There was a bend to the right which obscured his view of the manor house, but he was able to catch a glimpse of the chimney stacks above the canopy. Going around the bend took only a minute, and then the manor house came into full view. The picture in the pub was quite obviously an old one. What he saw before him was in ruins and almost fully reclaimed by the forest. The roof had collapsed in on itself, leaving only the exterior walls and the chimney stacks standing. It appeared to have fallen through the third floor and coming to rest on the second floor, exposing both to the elements. Only the first floor seemed intact. The stairway up to the portico landing and to the front door was visible only in spaces, with the rest being covered in dirt and grass. The giant columns to either side of the door were covered in ivy, as was most of the exterior walls. The door itself, and the crescent-shaped window above it, appeared intact. Windows could be seen through the foliage, most of which were broken, but a few remained intact. The grounds that laid before him couldn't be recognized as such, except for a multitude and various array of broken statuary. Some tall, some short, some a mere pile of stone, while others were mostly intact, and even recognizable in feature. A path wound between the statues and out to various aspects of the grounds, but all the paths emanated from the grand foliage-covered staircase entrance to the manor house. A shadow crossed one of the first-story windows. The American caught a glimpse of the dark spectral mass shifting in his peripherals and turned quickly to focus on it. The windows remained still and quiet, and no noticeable movement was observed by him in the darkness. The American moved in closer. Halfway across the statuary-laden grounds, and still a good bit away from the front portico, he stopped. He retrieved his phone again and took some pictures. Upon returning the phone to its pocket, he noticed an uptick in the noise around him. It sounded as if a flock of birds had suddenly taken flight and were circling the area, but he saw no birds in the sky. Maybe they're in the forest, he thought to himself, but he couldn't shake the growing feeling of uneasiness within him. The server had not been wrong in the directions she gave him to get here, so why should she be wrong in telling him to leave if things didn't feel right? To him, at this moment, the logic seemed sound, and so he mounted the bicycle and returned to town. He sat in the pub for an early dinner and that pint he had been advised to get by the server just the day before. When he had returned to town and returned the bicycle to the shop, he had walked the several blocks slowly back to the B&B and to his room. He needed to clear his head. Could it have been just his imagination? Sure, he thought to himself, compounded maybe by unintentional autosuggestion, fueled by the Waterford incident and the server's story. Absolutely. And that added tidbit about the Tcha Malihe from the old gentleman, most likely. Still, he thought there was something odd about that house, something truly unsettling. So he returned to his room, cleaned himself up, downloaded the pictures onto his laptop, checked and sent some emails, and posted about his trip thus far on several social media sites. He went back down to the pub for a bite to eat and a Guinness. He had missed lunch, so the thought of dinner in the mid-afternoon was amenable to him. The same serving woman was there, and he was seated by her at the same little table he had been at the night before. He placed his order, and when she returned with his pint, she inquired as to if he had made it out to the old manor house. She maintained the twinkle in her eye and just a hint of laughter in her voice as he regaled her with his adventures. He was being serious, almost to the point of being dramatic. She clearly was not responding in like manner. As he ate, the clouds outside began to roll in, blocking out the sun and threatening rain. A middle-aged man came into the pub and gave a hurried word or two directed at the barkeep. In turn, the barkeep motioned over to the server and gave her implicit instructions, to which she followed. She closed the windows on the west side of the pub, securing them with locking shutters. As for the rest of the windows, she merely closed them and drew the internal shades. As she passed, the American called her over and asked about the flurry of activity. She explained.
Right after those clouds rolled over, someone reported seeing a flock of starlings on the western horizon. In this town, that means we close up early. Go on, finish that pint of yours, and then you best be getting back to your hotel room. Lock up your windows against the storm and enjoy a quiet evening in tonight.
He was back outside the pub. The entrance to the B&B was just about a block away. The American heard a whisper of wings and looked up. Starlings, it must have been the flock he was told about, were flying in a crescent formation on the horizon. And there was a strange scent in the air. It was faint, but the distinctly putrid stench of rotten meat was on the wind. He hurried indoors and made sure his windows were locked and settled down for an evening in front of the television. The storm was bad that night. The wind howled and the rain seemed merciless. The western sides of the house seemed to have gotten the worst of it, though, several broken windows and shingles blown off the roof. One of the shutters on the outside of his window had blown clean off, and this pattern of minor destruction was repeated throughout the town, always on the west-facing side of the building. Or so were the reports he was hearing from various folks, including one priest who stopped by the B&B during breakfast to look in on how all fared. The most disturbing account was of an old man who was caught outside in the storm last night. He was coming home from a pub a few blocks down, a pub that didn't close early, and he was found on the side of the street, dead. The ambulance had come earlier and taken him to one of the hospitals just south of town. The American stood and thanked his host for a good warm meal after a tremulous night. He stepped outside to see for himself, and what he saw corresponded exactly to what was being reported. He walked down to the pub and saw both the barkeep and the server repairing shutters and picking up bits of trash that had blown in. She greeted the American warmly, but without her normal jocularity. The conversation hadn't gone on for any length of time before the older gentleman from the pub 2 nights before came up to both of them. He held his curved-handled cane up to the server in what could be construed as a threatening manner for an 85-year-old man and said to her,
"You!"
gesturing to the American.
"You had to tell that one where to find it, didn't you?
He gestured broadly to the street they were on.
And now look."
He then turned his attention to the American.
"And you, boy, you've got a pound-sized head with 6 pence worth of sense in it. We've truly enjoyed having you in our little town here, but I think you'd best be off. It won't be long before all you'll see here is pitchforks and torches."
He stomped off angrily. The server turned to him and apologized. Her expression was one of earned rebuke and of guilt. She had been sweet to him, but the undertone of the apology was one of agreement with the older gentleman. The feel of this quaint little town in Roscommon County had changed, and the American removed his phone from his pocket and called the next hotel on his itinerary to see if he could check in a few days early. Tourists, constantly and clumsily stumbling into areas for which they have no business. But it's true, how could he have known? Ignorance of the preternatural is no excuse. On what fool errands will this man find himself onto next? We shall see.
A Murmuration of Starlings is an original story based on a popular Irish folktale written specifically for Fireside Nightmares. All rights reserved. Please stay tuned for the second half of our show as Josh and Story discuss tonight's episode, and all of the interesting facts surrounding it.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Fireside Nightmares. I hope you have enjoyed our story tonight, A Murmuration of Starlings. Good morning, Miss Story. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. So, we're going to do just a quick little intro here because although we are celebrating, we are celebrating the Irish Folklores, the Murmuration of Starlings did not do a great job of telling us which beastie we were dealing with. It just hinted towards them. So our friends that we're celebrating today are the Slua, or also known as the Slua Namari, which are known as the hosts, or the host of the dead. Interesting thing, now we have to be really careful, if you believe in the old ways and the truths behind the old ways, in how many times we say their name, because there is a belief that if you say their name 9 times, you start attracting their attention, and that's, as we'll find out, a very bad thing.
That's kind of like the Candyman and the Bloody Mary.
Urban
legends.
Or, if you want to go modern, Voldemort.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, I said his name.
Uh-oh.
He who shall not be named.
There you go.
Which is really ambiguous when you're trying to talk about a very specific individual. So, yeah, let's take just a quick walk as to who they are. We're going to go through, because there are several ideas, several traditions, just minor modifications of who the hosts are, and excuse me, and their origin story, more or less. The origins of our friends the hosts are just a little bit ambiguous. Most people agree that they are the souls of the dead who fly around in groups instead of walk. That's where we start seeing a little deviation. Now, the first bit is that these are the souls of the darkest sinners to ever have walked planet Earth.
Correct.
Which is interesting because these stories predate Christianity in the Emerald Isle. So I have to wonder, with the term sinners, if that's just being used as a generalized term for very bad people, or if this is an interpretation that was brought in after Christianity was a big thing. Catholicism was a big thing in Ireland.
Yeah. I find that it was more the predate to Christianity because, if you think about it, the Sluag was actually got into the Headless Horseman.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually a version of the Sluag, but so
we're 5 in, 4 more times, and we in trouble.
But yeah, they were, they were the nastiest of the nasty entities.
Absolutely. Souls so evil, apparently, that hell itself didn't want to deal with them.
Kind of like me.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, you're not quite dead yet.
I still have that restraining order.
Well, we'll see if it's active after you pass on. It's amazing which laws get violated.
True.
The laws of man are not necessarily the laws of the universe or any particular design of the universe. But now here's what I found that was really interesting about this particular theme is that, yes, hell didn't want them, but apparently neither did Mother Earth. So when hell spat them right on back out, Mother Earth said, no, No. You walked on me once. You're never doing it again.
Yep.
Which does then, of course, explain their appearance or their reported appearance. Yes, they are now destined to soar throughout the skies because even Mother Earth doesn't want to be touched by them.
Mm-hmm.
Birds have a very long tradition in both horror and, of course, in folklore, though. And the two birds mostly associated with our friends the hosts, because I'm not going for a sixth one here.
Raven.
Raven is one.
Crow.
Well, raven and crows
essentially
are
crow and raven's
essentially the same. I mean, unless you're an ornithologist,
Yeah.
you probably don't know the difference, or can't explain the difference. But starlings are another one.
Yeah.
Which brings me back real quick to the title of the story, which was A Murmuration of Starlings. Now, most people, if you're not familiar with starlings, and starlings are very strange birds.
Yes, they are.
They really are. The term murmuration not only describes them as a group, much like a murder of crows or a pod of whales, but also their flight patterns, their flight paths, their flight, I won't say preferences, but I'm forgetting the word that I'm looking for, which happens often. That's usually what happens when I don't have enough sleep and too much caffeine. It'll come to me, and I may have to edit it in later. But nonetheless, their flight patterns, behaviors, if you will. And now anybody who's ever seen starlings flying around the sky see that they are odd in the way that they do it. Large groups of starlings flying around almost perfectly in sync, undulating through the sky.
They almost look angelic the way they fly, because it's just they circle around and then they come back, and then it's just. I remember when I lived in Illinois, we had a lot of those, and it was mesmerizing to watch them fly.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
truly is.
Now, that's the pretty side of the starlings. I have a story about the not so pretty side of the starlings. I don't quite understand why this happened, but I just think that my daughter Tara was meant to be around animals. When she was 6 months old, we were in the house, and we heard a really strange rumble. And the next thing you know, we had a murmuration of starlings come down the chimney, out our fireplace, and hundreds of them in our front room, our kitchen, our family room. And it was
Kimberly
just,
must have been going crazy, because that is a sick omen.
oh no, Kahlua wasn't even a thing back then. This was 20 years ago, and wow, I honestly couldn't. But we spent days picking starlings out of our house. It was 2-3 days later, I'm still reaching behind the couch, grabbing starlings that have their claws sunk into the back of the couch and throwing them outside.
Wow.
I have no idea why they would do such a thing. But I will tell you now, we learned a very valuable lesson. Always close your flue. Yeah. So the whole point of that was to say it doesn't surprise me that they would have a more nefarious reputation to them, because the behavior is just strange.
Yeah,
strange.
it is. They're kind of wackadoodle.
Yeah, they are. So are our friends the hosts, though, which is why they're associated with such critters. Ravens or crows, we know, actually have a less nefarious reputation throughout the folklore world. I mean, obviously, Odin and his ravens.
Yeah.
Odin had a worse reputation than his ravens, as I recall.
Poe.
Poe, yeah. Well,
He's one of my favorite literal artists.
yeah. Although I guess Poe's raven was not nearly as bad.
No.
Nevermore. Bird just said one word, nevermore. It was enough to freak him out, and I know it would freak me out too, but...
Well, they didn't realize that ravens actually can speak.
Yeah.
Nothing short of like the minor birds are also able to speak, which look a lot like the raven.
Yep.
So, go figure.
Yeah. And when you look at through a lot of the older religions throughout the world, birds feature heavily in it. I mean, Egypt, into India, and even into the South American religions. There are birds and feathers everywhere. Native American religions.
Deep into the eagles and just all kinds of omens and stuff, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
They believe that actually when you die that the soul gets carried away by a bird.
That they do. And we've seen that play out in even modern movies. The Crow, which was a fantastic movie. I'm sad that they did a part 2 on it, and I'm really sad that I think they did a remake of it.
They should have just left it alone.
They should have just left it alone, because it was a fantastic movie. Just incredible movie, as a matter of fact. And
Tragic at the same time, but
well, I mean, that's the whole point of the movie.
yeah. Well, no, the actual making of, when Brandon Lee passed away, making the movie, that was.
Yeah, you would think that after decades of being an armorer on a movie set, you would check to make sure that the guns were not loaded with live ammunition. Why would they even allow live ammunition on an active soundstage? I don't know. We're digressing here a bit, but let's face it. Was it Alex Baldwin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alec
Baldwin. I don't know, I'm not a big fan of the Baldwin brothers, but
he's just a strange person anyway. But
yeah. Well, most Hollywood types are at this point. It would just seem. Well, I'm not going to get into that.
Right. We're really digressing.
Right. Yeah. Well, although I don't know. I mean, we could be seeing the slow metamorphosis back into our hosts. They got to start off ugly, and they just get worse from there. Now, some believe that, and this is kind of an interesting theory. Some believe that the hosts were just fae, were just fairies that just went horribly wrong.
Some aspect of that folklore, there are mean fairies. They're not so whimsical as most people think they are.
Oh no, definitely not. I mean, it's. Fairies were never meant to be all bippity boppity boo.
That's a Disney aspect of it.
It's a very Disney aspect of it. No, they were far more grim fairy tales.
I mean, my favorite fae of all time is Maleficent. If you really want, because she was essentially a fairy who got her wings taken away from her.
I don't know that much about Maleficent. I don't know if I.
You got to read the book, not the Disney book, but the book.
Oh, so she exists beyond the Disney
Yes.
universe. I had no idea.
I'll give you the book.
Oh. Oh dear, a little more research to do. Well, we have stories to write still. But yeah, so they were thinking, the theory is that it is a corruption of the Fae, much like the orcs.
Yes.
In the Lord of the Rings series, having been corrupted from the original elven stock.
Right.
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that, especially as we get into these conversations. You will find that the fairies themselves were not originally fairies.
Mm-hmm.
But those are conversations for another podcast, and we'll get there soon enough.
Yeah.
But I think most people agree that the hosts are, for whatever reason, were denied entry into the afterlife, which is why they're stuck flying around, because Mother Earth, again, does not want them walking upon her, flying around the sky, pretty restless and well, dead.
Yeah.
Very dead and not all at the same time. Almost zombie-like. Some reports that some reports, like there's a newscaster out there interviewing the host of the dead. Hey, can I talk to you for a moment here? Yeah. Why do you stink? No, but some accounts, some stories say that there is a smell of rotting meat that surround them. I would say it's probably more of a decaying corpse, but I mean, I don't know.
Kind of like Vulturist.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think that's where they get that's kind of the reputation that they're going for. I don't know if there are much in the way of vultures out in the UK, but I know there are a lot here. So let's see what else we got. Well, we did talk about the starlings and the ravens. Now, they do apparently, and this seems to be across all of the more popular tales of them, instead of doing the typical murmuration patterns of a starling, which undulate and are almost random, almost even fractal, except they were very soft around the edges, they tend to fly in a crescent pattern. or so they say. Which is how I think people can differentiate them from a typical starling murmuration. Which is good to be able to tell the difference, because you don't want to be freaking out every time you see starlings, especially if you have a whole flock of starlings that live, a mile down the road.
Correct.
That's a terrible way to live, being afraid of birds.
Yeah.
Alfred Hitchcock didn't help with that back in the 60s. No, not at all.
He more like hit it home.
Yeah. Well, and he did do ravens or crows, though, didn't he? Blackbirds of some sort.
Those were crows.
Yeah.
So a true murder of crows.
That would be a mass killing with the amount of crows that he did, not just a single murder.
Oh my goodness.
So let's see. Oh, you've got some paper in front of there. Oh, look at that. And it even has pictures of birds on the front there. So what did you find?
I found I'm going to say it, the sluag.
And we're up to 6.
Spirits of the Unforgiven Dead. Basically, they were dislodged souls. Robert Kirk provided one of the most earliest reports of the gathering in about 1690, saying, "Our Highlanders making still a distinction betwixt," I can't pronounce that word. It's Gaelic, and I am not Irish. Basically, it translates into earthly host.
Okay.
And the Sluag sit, averring that the souls go into the Sith were dislodged. Basically, the accounts collected by the folklorists in the Scottish Highlands and the islands in the 19th century confirmed that the Sluag were believed to be the spirits or mortals who had died. In some accounts, the hosts were armies of fighting soldiers.
So we're up to 8.
Okay. We need to come up with another word, because I'm going to be saying this word for a minute.
The hosts.
Okay.
Will
there we
work
go.
for me. I just don't have time to batten down the west side of the windows and doors around here.
Okay. So, armies that were battles in the sky. On the Isle of the Barra, Alexander Carmichael was told that the spirits fought great battles in the air, and that their crimson blood may be seen staining the rocks and stones. Again, not Gaelic. The blood of the hosts is the beautiful red crotol of the rocks melted by the frost. And there are other stories. The hosts were not so much an army as a scourge. They took the form of gusts of wind, burning skin, and causing boils alternately. Storytellers to whom Carmichael spoke said that the spirits fly about in great clouds up and down the face of the world like the starlings, and come back to the scenes of her earthly transgressions. In other accounts, the hosts appear as the whirlwinds of flapping wings and undulating shadows like a flock of crows or ravens. The hosts were believed to fly from the west in the mouth of the night, seeking souls to steal. When the person laying down, the door and the windows on the west side of the house were therefore secure to keep the spirits out. So everybody in Ireland and the Highlands would shut the west side of their house up.
Yes, they would. Well, they would lock up, but they would make sure that the west side was absolutely fortified.
Correct.
Apparently, as the stories go, that they could only enter from the west side.
Right. The most dangerous times, of course, was during Samhain or Halloween.
Yep.
And the liminal time when the gates of hell would open and the host would rise forth. Woe betide anyone who was out alone. So basically what that means is during Samhain or Halloween, the veils between the worlds is at its thinnest, and that's why they were able to enter.
Yep.
So.
Well, yeah, and not only just enter, but transport.
Yes.
Yes. And that was a lot of the things that I read about the hosts, all surrounded the folks who were on death's door, being desperately afraid that it wouldn't be God, it wouldn't be their angels that are escorting them across,
right,
but that the hosts would sneak in somehow and steal them away.
Were you able to watch the movie The Haunting of the Grady Farm?
I have not, but you did tell me about it.
Yes.
I actually.
It's actually a movie set on the host, and it's based in Florida.
Well, that's terrible.
So you know it. Well, no, it's actually pretty good.
Did the host get shot at? Eaten by alligators?
You gotta watch it. You gotta watch it. It's awesome. They've actually even made a game after it.
Oh, good Lord. That's funny. We should play sometime then. Well, I've got to watch the movie first.
Definitely
see,
watch the
now
movie.
Now I've got to look at it.
And it was back in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, rednecks against Irish folklore. I mean, I don't know
would've
who would
thunk?
win.
Who would have thunk?
Well, somebody did apparently because they made a movie about it. So we did touch on this, but our friends, the hosts, do like to harvest souls. And again, the reason for them harvesting souls can be varied depending on who is telling the stories. I think most folklorists agree that it has something to do with power and influence, whether it's paying off a debt to hell or increasing their own ranks.
Yeah.
Now, that would be pretty scary. There you are, a nice guy. You're on your deathbed. You're expecting that bright light's going to come up and you're going to go walk down that tunnel and bam. You've lived your life well and now here are the rewards. And the next thing you know, you got this shadowy thing standing over you on your deathbed.
Kind of like the things in the Ghost, the movie. They come and eat you apart and take you to the nether regions of wherever you need to go.
Well, and this would be worse because they may not even, I should say, take you or drag you down to hell. They may absorb you into their numbers. So now you're one of the flock.
It's like the Borg.
Yeah, and they are not pretty people.
No,
these things they're just really ugly. When you talk about the description that they have here, and they have multiple descriptions, but most people agree, or most folklorists, I should say, agree that they are kind of bird-like looking characters. But some people describe them more as a wretched appearance, thin shades of their previous self. I love the poetry that surrounds folklore, especially Irish folklore. Gnarled talons like the blackthorn's bow for hands and feet, wings of dusky smoke. That just, out of all the description I have, that's actually not a bad one. They get uglier from here.
Yep.
This one, great ugly dark shadows, like beings with long thin fingers, webbed with leathery skin, cape-like wings, so that when they're not flying, which presupposes that they can either hover or hang upside down or otherwise not touch Mother Earth, the wings hang around them like a cape or a cloak. And then, of course, long, gnarled claws produced from deformed legs. Like crow's feet, just not around the eyes, just at the end of the feet. That's a pretty scary description when you think, can you imagine there you are walking around, the road, and the next thing you know, you see this thing hanging upside down, and it looks like that? Yeah. You're talking, a mere shadow of what they were. Well, if you're a mere shadow of a human being, you're still about 4 feet tall. That is a pretty freaking ugly thing to be. There you are walking down the road, and there it is hanging from a tree, and you think to yourself, yeah, I'm in trouble.
I'm shooting.
See, that's the Florida response. We're going to shoot that, we're going to stuff that, we're going to mount it, and maybe we make a penny off of it.
Or maybe even be able to eat it.
Ooh, I put worse things in my mouth. Now, here's the interesting one that I found. There were some accounts that describe them as being shapeshifters.
I've heard that too.
So, yeah, they're not always looking bird-like. Sometimes they are a little more human-like. Now, it doesn't mean the human form is all that pretty to look at. According to them, they are haggard with old skin that sags, right, seemingly kind of hanging off of the bones, flapping in the wind. Like someone who was 400 pounds and went on a crash diet and was now suddenly 150 pounds. They've got all that loose skin
extra
just
skin.
flapping off at everything. Except apparently the hosts, I almost said it, the hosts have better tans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Appendages being long and gangly, ending in sharp nails. These things are the things that nightmares are made out of. Without a doubt. But everybody believes, well, folklorists agree, I should say. I don't want to say that everybody believes because it's a very broad-reaching statement, but folklorists tend to agree that they are dark and shadowy entities. Some accounts likening them to swirling masses of mists or fog. Others, they're being very corporeal, something you can reach out and touch. And worse, something that can reach out and touch you. More pictures.
Well, yeah. There's a article saying that they also went after lovers.
Yes. Yes.
Wicked or saintly, kind or cruel. The host plays no favorites. They'll take the souls of all that cross their path, although some say they have a particular taste for the living spirits of those who have found true love.
Yep.
The ancients used to think that they were fairy gone terribly wrong, warped and twisted, without fear, reason, or mercy. When the light came to the Ireland, they became the souls of the lost sinners seeking to drag the unfaithful down to hell with them, but the result was the same.
Yep.
So, there again, it was an indiscriminatory attack.
Well, I mean, if you're the worst of the worst, you really don't care.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know. But that's doubly bad. Though you're the worst of the worst, so you really don't care. You don't discriminate. Except for that guy there. Oh, he looks really happy. We're gonna go mess that up.
Right. Are you faithful to your mate?
Yeah, right. Great. Just the thing that you want to be faced with in Ireland. You're walking down the road and this big ugly thing's looking at you and you're thinking to yourself, shoot, I should have been a worse husband.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, okay, so they were known to be predominantly around Halloween time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was forbidden to light fires because they did not want to attract them. And Ireland, Halloween, it's cold.
Yeah.
So you froze your butt off just so you didn't get dragged away by these demon birds.
That's a lot of wool you're wearing.
That part.
That's a lot of wool. Yeah. And not just cold, but rainy as well.
Yeah. Very, very, yeah.
Well, which is, if I had to guess, which is why they decided to lock up the houses as opposed to, just not burn fires anywhere to attract their attention. Because I know, and I'd be terribly selfish about this, I'd much rather board my windows and be home, inside, warm. And safe, than be sitting there in the dark waiting for these big, ugly baddies to miss me.
Yeah.
Yeah, to fly right on past. Bye. Yeah, no, thank you. Well, no matter what, and I got to tell you, I'm surprised that we haven't seen more of the hosts in modern horror films. I guess they probably can be pretty closely related to vampires in their opinions, or not in their opinions, but their appearance and their actions. But there are still some very distinct differences. Mm-hmm. And maybe people just don't know how to deal with them, or maybe I'm just not watching the right cinema. Maybe I should be exploring Irish horror instead.
There's a lot of that out there. I mean, especially over in the UK and across the pond.
Oh, absolutely.
Another interesting fact about the hosts is if denied their rights. So basically, if you get away, as they see it feast, they don't balk at the slaughter of cattle, cats, dogs, or sheep with their poison darts. It said that the hosts commanded men to follow them, and they obeyed, having no alternative. It was these men of the earth who slew and maimed the bidding of their spirit masters. So basically, it's like a mind control.
You see, and that's where it gets really kind of ugly. Because if you're a firm believer in these folklores, you got to look at every battle ever fought. You've got to look at every war. You've got to look at everything. What in the world would have possessed somebody to do something that stupid? Well, maybe that's a literal question, not a figurative question. What was I looking at?
The last thing I have on them is once they have your scent, let me tell you, you're in trouble. If the pitiable mortal that has drawn their eye can bestir themselves, it would be well to get indoors with all locked and fastened until the beating of the dark wounds fades with the light of the dawn. Chroniclers of old also wisely advise avoiding places of loneliness such as dark forests, empty streets, lest passing a hunt might take a fancy to you. There is one other way to avoid joining them for all eternity, although most dreadful it is that it's to give them another in your stead. So basically giving up a sacrifice.
Great. Going Jack Sparrow all over them.
They say a woman
talk
was
about
eaten
another
alive
bird.
by the host in Roscommon on the map. So
Now, I did hear about that. I did hear that, and I tried to look it up, and I didn't see any news stories or anything beyond that mention, that single mention there about it. But I find that fascinating because if you think about it, that's not the host's typical behavior, to eat somebody alive on the road.
right.
On the other hand, I mean, who's to say? Alrighty, guys, I think that'll do it for us this evening. Thank you for joining us for not only our story, the Murmuration of Starlings, but also an engaging conversation, a little education behind it. Thank you again, Miss Story.
You're welcome.
We will see you guys next time.
Beware of the slug.
Oh, you win it. You were 9, and you had to do it in my house too. I'm sending them to you. I got your address.
Okay.
Yeah. They're all yours.
The second part of tonight's presentation of Fireside Nightmares was sponsored by Everbright Solutions. When you need your lighting display done by professionals and done right, Everbright Solutions is there for you. Find them on Instagram at everbright_solutions_LLC and also by Retakes. Retakes is a leading manufacturer of service calling systems, guest pager systems, tour guide systems, window intercom systems, conference devices, FM transmitters, and radios. Find them online at www.retekess.com. Be sure and listen in next time for the next installment of our salute to Irish folklore. These stories, drawn directly from the Emerald Isle's long and fascinating traditions, are sure to curl your toes and make you think twice about walking home from the pub alone.